Let's kick off then. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining. My name is Karen Woodhead, and I'm the Vice President for Global Marketing here at Smoothwall and for our parent company, Family Zone. And it's so good to see so many of you on the call today. Really thrilled that you've been able to join us. I think I've met several of you at some point over the years, but welcome, everyone. I have with me today Rob Faulkner, who's our Technical Director at Smoothwall and also our digital monitoring expert. And Rob will be taking us through what monitoring is and how it works. And alongside Rob, I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Mark Osborne. And Mark is the Director for IT and Infrastructure at Northern Education Trust. And Mark's trust is a long-standing user of digital monitoring technology. And I know it's made a huge difference to the lives of their students and to staff as well. And so much so, Mark and his team won the Impact Award at BET in 2020, the last BET that we had pre-pandemic. They won the Impact Award for the phenomenal work that they've done around spotting early stage risks and preventing escalation and incidents. So Mark will be talking more about the impact that monitoring has had on the trust and students a little bit later on, and answering any questions, of course. And before I hand over to Rob and Mark, I just want to make a few housekeeping notes. Please include any questions in the chat as they occur to you. We will answer them all. We'll make time at the end for that. If you'd rather speak up, just raise your hand and we'll unmute you, and we would really welcome that too. That's fantastic. We want to hear about your experiences as well regarding student safety during this webinar. So we're going to be running 3 polls at various stages. There's nothing to do right now on those. We'll let you know when they're coming up. But that will be really useful to know what you're going through and what you're experiencing and the challenges that you're having regarding spotting early stage risks. We are recording the session and we will be sharing it afterwards. So please feel free to share it on to colleagues who couldn't be here today and send it far and wide. That would be our pleasure. That would be great. So that's it from me. I'll come on a little bit later on, but in the meantime, I shall hand over to Rob. And yes, thanks for joining everyone, and let's get started. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Karen. So hi, everyone. So let's have a look at what we're going to be covering today. So digital monitoring, we'll start off by going into what it is and how does it work, and specifically in a MAT environment, how that works. We'll take a look at how digital monitoring helps spot risks, including child-on-child abuse, which is a key focus of the new KICSI consultation that's taking place at the moment. We'll also talk about what that is. Then we'll hand over to Mark, who will talk a little bit about Northern Education Trust and how digital monitoring has impacted them and their students. We'll talk a little bit about some of the myths around digital monitoring. And then we'll go into the practicalities around how that works and how that can save DSLs valuable time. And then, as Karen mentioned, any questions that you might have through the Q&A, we'll be more than happy to go through those. So we'll make sure we leave plenty of time to go through those. But yeah, any point, feel free to drop those in, and we'll pick those up. Great. So without further ado, digital monitoring. What is it? So digital monitoring is a software and human tool that allows students that are at risk to be flagged based on what they're doing, what they're saying, what they're sharing in their digital lives. And this is the kind of thing that teachers and parents often don't see and therefore can go unnoticed. So it's essentially kind of a virtual assistant for a DSL that helps them spot at-risk students that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to do with, just using their eyes and ears and walking around a classroom. So how it works is a pupil will be using a device, and usually this is a school-owned device. So whether that's a PC in a classroom, or it's a laptop, a Chromebook, potentially one that they take home as well, or it could even be an iPad. And as they're typing and engaging with that device, if there are any at-risk words or behaviors, that would trigger an alert to be raised. So there's an initial layer of analysis that takes what they're doing, and perhaps they're just typing that the weather's nice today. So there's no particular risk around that, so that wouldn't trigger an alert. But maybe if there's something that is either a very clear indicator that the child is at risk, or maybe something that's a bit more grey and needs some more investigation, then that will trigger to the next phase. So that's where that artificial intelligence assesses that to decide what type of risk that is. So categorize it in terms of low risk and high risk. So high risk along that bottom path would be reviewed by the human moderation team at Smoothwall. So a team of people who review this activity, look at some of the recent activity of that user as well and see if that indicates a pattern or a trend. And then based on that, if that is something that is high risk, so maybe there's an imminent threat of that student doing harm to themselves or being bullied or being groomed or whatever that might be, that would then send through an email, an alert to the school. And in the instance that that is an imminent threat to life, our team would also call that school. So make a phone call to the DSL and the named contacts to make sure that they are alerted to that imminent issue. In terms of low risk, they would just be stored in the dashboard. So they would go into there. So if there is an incident perhaps later on with that student, it gives you then the opportunity to look back and say, was there a pattern of kind of lower risk behavior that then escalated into a higher risk? So it's really useful to build that full picture around a student's behavior that can really help to intervene and provide the support to them that they really need. Incidents as well that meet that kind of high risk threshold automatically go into record management systems as well. So if you're using CPOMS, My Concern, or Safeguard Record Manager, which is our own record management product, those incidents will be raised in there as well. And that's really, really important because that then allows you to store those incidents along with that chronology of the student. So that, again, if there's further incidents that happen later, your team have got the ability then to refer back to the digital evidence that was collected as part of that monitoring. So really, it's not a replacement for a DSL. It's giving you an extra pair of eyes and ears to be able to identify these risks that might be happening on digital devices. So one of the things that's a kind of hot topic at the moment is how this feeds into keeping children safe in education. So there's two pieces of key government guidance, statutory guidance that surround monitoring, which is keeping children safe in education, and the work that the Safer Internet Centre do around appropriate monitoring and filtering for students. So both Keeping Children Safe in Education and the Safer Internet Centre talk about the use of appropriate monitoring in schools. So having a tool such as this that allows you to identify risks that are difficult to spot just by walking around the classroom and talking to people. And as part of that Keeping Children Safe in Education legislation, it's updated every single year, and there's a consultation process whereby schools, MATs, governors and other leaders are consulted on what should go into that. And there's a consultation phase running at the moment. And two of the key points in that consultation that they are proposing to add to that guidance is firstly around child-on-child abuse. So previously they've used this term peer-on-peer abuse to indicate two people in an education environment that one is suffering abuse from the other, and that's actually being updated to refer to it specifically as child-on-child abuse, to really draw attention to the fact that we're not just looking at risks of abuse, whether that's sexual, physical, emotional abuse between adults and children, but this is very much a child-on-child thing that happens as well. And it specifically calls out the terms victims and perpetrators. So it's really putting emphasis on the fact that schools should not be just looking at kind of adult versus child incidents, that there is very much a huge rise in child-on-child abuse. The second section that I really draws attention to is that students may not be ready or feel able to speak about abuse that's happening. So how do we address that? You know, if children aren't going to tell us about it, we need to have other mechanisms in place to be able to identify when that abuse is happening. And that's again where monitoring is something that's really important, because it does help reveal some of these issues that would not be known about if we just relied on children telling us that something has happened. So this consultation actually closes today. We actually have responded to that consultation, but we'd love to hear your views on that. And obviously, you know, there's still a chance to feed back on that, and we can share the links afterwards if that's something that you're interested in. So what we'd like to do now is just go into our first poll. So if I just pull this up, it should pop up on your screen. Very, very quick poll. And what we're really asking for here is, out of all the concerns that you have regarding safeguarding at the moment, is there any particular one that stands out as being more concerning? So what we've got in there is bullying and violence, online sexual abuse, self-harm, grooming, drug abuse, other mental health concerns, or other if it's just not one of those. So yeah, love to hear your views on that. Okay, I think most of you responded to that now. So I'll end that poll and we'll have a look at the results. If I press that, you should see that on your screen. So yeah, I think you know, self-harm is something that I think we all recognise is a very unfortunately prevalent issue within schools. And again, that can be something that's difficult to spot unless you know, you've got mechanisms in place to help identify that. Obviously, we'll all know that children that do self-harm often do so in places that are not visible. So we definitely see through our monitoring a lot of children, unfortunately, that are looking for perhaps ways to self-harm, ways to hide and conceal these things, and research around that. So hopefully, you know, monitoring is something that can help identify students that might be at risk of self-harm, hopefully before they even take those steps to do so. You know, we've got a few others in there as well. You know, online sexual abuse, bullying, violence, and other mental health concerns. You know, we've seen a lot of worries from students recently around things like the threat of war, you know, concerns about, you know, are we entering into a nuclear war? And I think that schools are definitely using this as part of their curriculum now. You know, they're educating children about what's going on in Europe, but it's something that, you know, we're seeing these kind of anxieties around from students, and we're reporting back to schools. Okay, so thanks for your participation in that poll. So we move on to the next thing I wanted to talk about now, which is what we call the iceberg effect. So we spoke in that poll about some of the things that we're concerned about in terms of activity of students and what they're doing. And there's very much kind of two sides of the story. There's the offline risks that you can see by your staff working with students, such as changes in their behaviour and their mood, injuries and bruises, deterioration in academic performance, absenteeism, them coming directly and asking for help, known domestic risks, so things that you know about perhaps their siblings, their parents and their family, and tip-offs from other people. These are offline risks that you can see and you can identify and react to. But there are a huge amount of digital risks or online risks that are very difficult to see. You know, particularly if you've got a classroom of students, they're all on devices. That teacher cannot see all of these things that are happening at once. It's simply impossible for them to monitor what's going on. And that's, of course, exacerbated when you've got students working from home, or you're sending devices home where it's completely impractical for the school staff to be able to monitor those 24/7. So these are things like online conversations about drugs, extremism, self-harm, a real emerging worrying trend around incel behavior, which is often associated with far-right kind of views and extremism. You've got chat room and video chat conversations with adults, which are often inappropriate. Bullying and violence, there's a lot of this that happens between students, often on platforms like Instagram, that are very difficult to spot. You've got self-generated sexual content and the sharing of explicit images. Overly abusive language, which can often be an indicator of mental health concerns or other things that are going on in that student's life. You've got feelings and emotions, and this happens quite a lot where students might be typing into a document. They've got no intention of sharing. It's more like a diary entry, or it's them just wanting to get something off their chest. So they're writing into a document about how they feel about things, maybe even in poetry or something like that. But then they might just delete that. You've got the child on child abuse we spoke about, which can come in very, very many different forms, different searches, and then you've got also oversharing of personal information, which can be an indicator of grooming and things like that. So the iceberg effect is all about the difference between what you can see just by physical safeguarding and what else you can start to see by implementing monitoring systems for digital safeguarding. That's something that I'd like to talk to Mark about and hear his views about, and how those sort of things have had an impact with Northern Education Trust.
Hi, Rob. Yeah, I mean, we started looking at digital monitoring back in 2018, shortly after I joined the trust. It was quite obvious at the time that whilst there were a lot of filtering reports going out to staff and DSLs, actually digital monitoring wasn't there was nothing in place. Of course, yeah, monitoring in classrooms, that was there. Teachers were monitoring the usage in the classroom, but it's just like you said about the iceberg effect. Actually, you're capturing very little of what's going on online. We saw, following the implementation of, it was visible at the time, Smooth More Monitor now, a huge increase in reported online alerts, so things that we weren't previously aware of. So I think in the first 12 months we had 430 category 4 alerts and 330 category 5 alerts. Well, actually, if you compare that to the previous year, we're talking, we weren't even in 3 figures in terms of what we were recording. Now, is that because we were missing those concerns, or is it because they weren't being recorded? Who knows? I suspect it's because we're missing some of them. And then it was very clear, soon after that, actually, the online monitoring solution that we had in place and the procedures and policies that we surrounded it with meant that we had a very clear overview of what was going on across the trust, across 21 academies across the trust, which is 14,000, 15,000 students. It says then it's like 251 students received pastoral care. Of the 300, I mean, all of those category 4 and 5 alerts led to interventions of some kind, but of those alerts, actually, there were more complex pastoral care put in place for 251 students. We also have now, and we had then, some very, very clear evidence that actually a number of those alerts directly led to vulnerable children and adults avoiding serious harm. And I'd go as far to say is that we've got evidence now, some 3 or 4 years later, that we have avoided fatalities of not just one child, and we've got a number of cases where we know that because of online monitoring, we've avoided serious harm to students and staff. And I say and staff because you do see safeguard alerts with staff as well, which you wouldn't have thought would be as prevalent, but it is. It mentions trends there. Because we're a large multi-academy trust across the north of England, actually it's really interesting that we can report centrally as a multi-academy trust. So I have an overview. Our DSL, who has responsibility across the trust, has an overview of all the academies, and we both report weekly to SLT, monthly to a corporate leadership team, bi-monthly to academy network meetings, and then I also report up to trustees and the board. So there's accountability and responsibility in terms of online monitoring from top to bottom across the trust, and that means that I'm not suggesting anyone would want to hide, but there is nowhere for anyone to hide, and that accountability is very clear and it's very transparent. And what it allows us to do is when we come together, we can say, has there been an increase in online sexual abuse in the Hartlepool area, for example? We've got a number of schools in Hartlepool. Is the cyberbullying increase in Northumberland? So we can look at those trends, identify them, and then adapt the curriculum and our life curriculum and PHSE, assemblies, that type of thing, to address those issues. And then obviously we can then report on the impact of those interventions that we've put in place because of the trends that we spotted. And that's something that we constantly do. And it works really, really well for us. Like I said, being such a large multi-academy trust, we can put the right interventions in the right places at the right time. The last part that I mentioned is improved Ofsted ratings. Actually, Ofsted, we've noticed, have became a little bit more, they've got a little bit tighter in terms of online monitoring, online filtering. And we've had a number of direct questions in Ofsted inspections regarding that as well. And we've had nothing but good feedback in terms of the work that we're doing. I was talking earlier to someone mentioning about, and you've mentioned keeping children safe in education. I think 2 or 3 years ago, you could have got away with not having an online monitoring solution. You could have convinced an Ofsted inspector that you've got filtering reports that come out and you monitor in the classroom, and that's enough. Well, keeping children safe in education in 2021 had a huge emphasis on technology and the risks associated with technology, and it then started going into cyber dependent crime and all those different things. 2022 is the same, and it's increased more. And I'm of the opinion now that you can't be compliant without an online monitoring solution, whatever that might be. And there's more than just Smoothwall Monitor out there. But I don't think you're compliant anymore with keeping children safe in education legislation unless you monitor online, because the risks are too great. And it's been brought to everyone's attention during COVID, and we had 7,000 Chromebooks out with students in the house, which all had Smoothwall Monitor on, and actually, of course, we've seen an increase in risks reported. I don't think that's necessarily the picture in a lot of other multi-academy trusts, and I think there are things going unnoticed, and now Ofsted and the DFE are starting to realise that there needs to be an emphasis on looking at specifically what academies and multi-academy trusts are doing to safeguard students online. But for us, it's been, our Ofsted ratings are amazing. All of our primaries are good or outstanding now. All of our secondaries that have been Ofsteded recently are good or outstanding. North Shore Academy, that's got 70% pupil premium in a very, very disadvantaged area. They went to outstanding all areas. And again, we've got excellent feedback in terms of safeguarding, which includes online safeguarding as well.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and just one of the questions we got through kind of spoke to what you were saying before about the way in which a filtering system can alert you to some things, but in your view, that's not really enough. And I guess that, filtering systems know about what websites you've been to, but that's not giving you the full picture around actually what's happening on that device.
Students are quite clever to the fact that you're monitoring what they're doing on the internet, and a lot of what we see is not online internet usage, like someone searching something in Google. That's the more serious ones are something where, for example, a student or a member of staff may write something into an email or a Word document, and they might be talking about harm they've suffered or something very serious that's going on in their private life. And I've seen it firsthand. They'll write something, they'll go to send it to someone, they'll think twice, they'll delete it, they'll delete all the text, and they'll close it. Now, historically, we never spotted that. in a million years, because it didn't exist. It doesn't exist, but it does exist within your monitoring solution because it takes a snapshot in time. Now we can then address that and go and see that student or that member of staff. You know, filtering reports will give you your daily notification or your list of alerts, or some of the more serious ones you can get through coming through straight away. But actually, an email at 9 o'clock at night to a principal or to a DSL may not be seen. You know, we've had an incident recently where a principal got a call at 9:30 at night. That was blue lighted, 999 call, and it resulted in something very, very serious. That would have been missed with a filtering solution. And this is what I'm saying. I don't think the use of technology has increased so much, and especially during COVID, and you know, that legacy will stay with us. That I don't believe filtering is enough to be. And I used to talk about being above compliant, beyond compliant, because we wanted to be beyond compliant. Yes, the trusts were compliant before because we had filtering reports, firewall reports, and we wanted to go above and beyond that. Well, actually, I don't think you've got a choice in terms of monitoring whatever solution you put in place. It is now about as much about compliance as about going above and beyond. Because I just don't think that a lot of, certainly large multi-academy trusts, I just think there's so many. If you've got 15,000 students and you need to monitor what they're doing online, in the house, you know, in school, you need a solution that's going to give you that overview. So I just don't think filtering reports are good. You used to be able to get away with it. I just don't think you can now.
I think it's an important point, Mark. And I think when the Safer Internet Centre did their consultation last year, which we were very vocal, and we spent a lot of time working with David and the directors at the Safer Internet Centre around this point, which is that they were advocating that monitoring should be considered. If you consider yourselves to be a low risk environment, you can rely on eyes and ears alone in the classroom. And our argument to that was, how do you know you're a low risk environment unless you can see below the waterline that we talked about before? The whole boatload of risks that are happening there, that unless you've got technology in place, you're not going to see. So you don't even have an accurate vision of and perspective on the level of risk that's happening within your school. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out in September in the new KICSI. And as I said, we've been participating in that again to make sure people are aware of the reality of what's going on. Because if you don't understand that, we see this world every single day. Okay, this is the category we work in. We see the risks. Unless you've got that visibility, you don't see what's happening below the waterline. So it's really important, this kind of technology. And like you say, it's getting more important as the months roll by and the years roll by.
Yeah, I think that the days of seeing a member of staff can monitor in the classroom were fair enough, but what about the member of staff? Because, and I know it's keeping children safe in education, but actually some things that, you know, people I know who use Smoother Monitor and things that we've seen ourselves, actually it's all linked. So we monitor everyone. We monitor from our trustees to CEO, every member of staff, every single user across our trust has Smoother Monitor on, everyone. And safeguarding risks come from more than just a child sat in front of a computer. And I know that from experience. I know that from what I've seen over the past 3 or 4 years. So I get what the Safer Internet Centre are saying as well, but I think you're on thin ice, I think, if you're going to do a risk assessment and declare yourself a low risk establishment for online safeguarding. I just think and I'm not sure why you'd want to do that, because surely safeguarding is top of the agenda for everyone anyway.
It was something that was in, I think it was a Safer Internet Centre, maybe it was KICSI that was talking about, you know, assume that these things are happening. Don't just say, well, you know, we live in a nice area and we're fairly well off and privileged and therefore we must be low risk. No, you're like, assume all these things we talked about are happening.
Yeah, that was Ofsted's abuse report, that one, Rob.
Yes.
It was so prevalent in the schools that they surveyed and investigated that they said, assume it's going on, even if you have no evidence, assume it is.
Yeah, and what I see, we have a lot of schools in disadvantaged areas, some of the most disadvantaged areas in the country. But we also have some schools in affluent areas or more affluent areas. There is no link between how affluent an area is or how disadvantaged an area is in what I see in terms of the trends or the number of alerts. We don't see more in a disadvantaged area than we do in a more affluent area, that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Just going to move on to the next slide, because I think there's a couple of questions that have come through that might be addressed through that. But obviously, Mark, if you've got any feedback on these next points, really, which is the myths around digital monitoring. And the first one, really, will you be bombarded with false positives? I think one of the questions that came through was, does doing this, implementing this kind of system, lead to a lot of extra work for DSLs with false positives and things like that? I think just before I kind of get your opinion on it, Mark, I think one of the key things here is the fact that this is a moderated service. So before things get to the school or the trust, it's going through a process where a human, a trained Smoothwall employee has looked at that to really look at the context of where that's happening. So it's not just that they've typed in, they've misspelled the word, and it's just come through as a swear word, and then that raises an alert. It's actually going through a human process virtually, which is assessing that risk. And obviously, the moderation team don't know these students, certainly, nothing like the DSLs and the staff in the schools. So, they will always err on the side of caution. But from what we see, that massively reduces the amount of false positives over an unmoderated service that might also be available. What are your thoughts on that, Mark?
I think if you're talking about category 4 and 5 alerts, the more serious alerts, we don't see false positives on those alerts. And we actually had an FOI regarding that, actually, and when I couldn't quite work out if we had actually recorded any. So, and I remember speaking to Smoothwall directly about that, and we didn't have any. We didn't have any false positives on category 4 and 5. Category 3 as well, we see very few. You see in the very lowest categories 1 and 2, you may see things that you could class as false positives, but again, that's few and far between, and it's not something that you're going to be bombarded with, because, like you mentioned earlier, actually, it's only your more serious risks that you're seeing, that you get, you're getting the phone call or you're getting those emails. The very, very low risks, those category 1 risks, are within the dashboard and are mainly recorded, in my opinion, to build up that profile, so that when some of the more serious risks come through, actually those people who are monitoring on your side and on ours can look at that profile and understand what's went on before, and actually a number of lower risk alerts may become a higher risk alert because of the trend that either your safeguarding team see or our safeguarding team see. But compared to the old-fashioned filtering reports where you got everything because of one word, that's not the way it is at all. I don't get any the alerts that come through to me. I don't get any false positives.
That's great. I think some of those lower ones are quite subjective, in that you might receive a level 1 or a level 2 alert for a student doing research on drugs, for example. Yeah. It's quite clearly part of their schoolwork. But if something develops where perhaps that child, in a year or two's time, actually does develop a serious drug problem, maybe that's something that the curriculum team want to look at and say, okay, the way that we approach that, the way that we gave them the freedom to research these topics, was it actually problematic? Can we learn from this? But I think it's all useful information. But it leads into some of these other points around surveillance and spying on students. So there's definitely got to be a balance between respecting a child's right to privacy, but also taking care of them. And they are young people on the internet, and they are vulnerable, and we've got a duty of care to protect them. In terms of spying on them through their webcams, absolutely not. That's not something that ever enters our mind to do. It just doesn't fall within the remit of what we're trying to achieve here, And then surveillance is, it's a question that, definitely people will ask themselves around, how do we balance that privacy? But I think there's a clear mandate in terms of the legislation and guidance around the need to do this kind of thing. Don't know if you've got comments on that. Was that something that, because you've had this quite a while, and I guess when you implemented it, tools like this weren't as prevalent. So did you face any things like that with people saying, this is surveillance and we shouldn't be doing this, or was everybody largely on board?
No, we had no pushback, because it's safeguarding, and it's our legal duty to safeguard, the students and staff in our trust. So we didn't have any pushback. we've had questions from outside again, FY, requests in terms of how it works and the like, and I'm sure you have as well. And I think in the early days, when we first started using it, in terms of those screenshots of what people were doing, I did have slight concerns back in 2018-19 around how much you could see around what those screenshots were taken. However, the systems got much better and clearly responded to that. And now, if you get a screenshot, you only see what you need to see. So that concern around surveillance is gone. It's not about surveillance. It's about safeguarding. So, and we've got a legal duty to do that. So there was no pushback at all.
Excellent. Yeah, I think, does it replace the role of a DSL? Never. I mean, it is really, from my perspective and what I see, giving that DSL more time to actually work with students. Certainly if you compare it to a self-managed tool, which, have been around for quite some time, where literally everything comes through to the DSL, false positives and everything. This is so much better because there is that moderation that removes those false positives, but also with the phone calls, the DSL is going to be alerted immediately if there's something of immediate risk. So yes, I don't think we would ever advocate replacing a DSL. We spoke about privacy, and then do we send the risk to the government? No, basically. All we send them to is school. But from a data protection perspective, the school is the data controller. It's your data. So what you choose to do with it is up to you and your own policies. We're just a processor and pass that on to you. Okie doke. And obviously, if there's any other myths that you all have heard about, obviously feel free to put those into the Q&A, and we'll come back to those at the end. It's time for another poll. So the next poll we've got is more on the operational side of digital safety. So we've talked a lot about the risks and what's in your mind about those. But when it comes to actually implementing a solution like this, so working alongside your IT teams to put this into place, what are the big concerns here? So whether it's lack of time or resource, concern about missing a child at risk, limited budget, knowledge of emerging risks and what they actually mean, or physically the technical deployment side of it, getting it onto devices and making sure they're protected. But yeah, great to see your feedback there. So we have a look at the results from that. I think lack of time resource is always going to be a challenge in schools. Nobody's just got acres of time free to be doing things. Missing a child at risk is obviously a concern and something that we should never be complacent about. But hopefully, through the use of tools like this, it allows us to be more effective than we could be without them. But yeah, interested to hear everyone's views on that. And limited budget. Is something that I'm sure is a concern for a lot of schools as well. Any particular comments on those, Mark, around budgeting, how you went about actually procuring the solution, and how you budget?
I think a lot of people I've spoke to in other multi-academy trusts and other academies, it seems to be fairly high up on the agenda to say, oh well, we're a large multi-academy trust, it's going to cost us X amount of thousands of pounds a year. But in my opinion, for what you get, the cost is relatively small. And I think, again, this is safeguarding. I'm not sure, if you're talking about a couple of £1,000 for a school or whatever it is, that's a big price to pay. So I think in terms of if an academy's prioritise other things over safeguarding, given the fact that it's in legislation, I'm not, fair enough, that's their choice. But I see more and more emphasis put on safeguard and online monitoring from large academies, large multi-academy trusts. So we didn't have any pushback at all in terms of that. In terms of the backing that I got off our executive team was pretty comprehensive. I mean, the issues around lack of time and stuff like that, I think the system doesn't create more work for you. Not at all. Yes, you may be more aware, but being more aware means you can respond and put more interventions in place and ultimately start bringing numbers down, and you can see that. And you can see that in the reporting as well. But again, I get back to the fact that this is safeguarding, and even if, obviously, smooth wall for me it's a bit of a moral dilemma for smooth wall, in that you're a company that make a profit, and this is a safeguarding tool, and it's a very delicate subject, isn't it? But for us, smooth wall provided, a solution that is very, it's priced well, it's not too expensive, and for us, I'm not trying to over exaggerate, but I know from what I've seen, I know from the alerts I've seen, that it has saved us from having fatalities. It has saved us from children, suffering harm or continue to suffer harm. I'm not sure you can put a price on that, and I'm not sure that people should be arguing about a lack of time or resource, because, like I said, surely safeguarding is first and foremost. So I dread to say you could probably put your price up, but don't quote us on that.
No, we'll leave that now. Yeah, I think in terms of time and resource, this is really about the practicalities of how it's implemented and managed, and that from a safeguarding perspective, one of the things that's really useful is that kind of central map management. So for somebody like yourself, being able to see all of your schools and collate that information as a whole, but also I'm sure you have DSLs and safeguarding teams in each of your schools who are just responsible for their own schools as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
it's dead easy. The deployment is dead simple. You provide it with the install from Smooth Wall. It takes 2 seconds to get it out, to your IT team. There is no burden on the IT team. In fact, it makes life easier for the IT team. They're not organising reports. They're not really getting involved. They're there as an IT user. Actually, as soon as it's deployed, they're sort of out the loop. So it makes my IT manager's life a lot easier. Simple management. Again, you can do whatever you want. So we've got a DSL lead for the trust, and there's a number of people centrally that have oversight over all academies. And then there's some people who just have oversight over their own academies. We can report across the whole trust to trustees and the academy network and whoever else. Again, it's as granular as you want it to be. You can have DSL contacts in every academy. That's someone centrally. You could have, we usually have a principal DSL, and then there's someone else as well centrally that was on there as a contact, just in case. But it's really flexible. It's not, there is no, once you hand it over and get that installed, then it looks after itself. So it's saved us time, if nothing else.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, so hopefully not too burdensome, and as you say, the benefits hopefully very much outweigh that initial time investment to get it set up, which, as you say, from the IT side is very, very simple, particularly if you're using things like Chromebooks and iPads and things like that. It is literally a 2-minute job. So
Chrome. We, like I said earlier, we handed out, it was nigh on 7,500 Chromebooks over lockdown, and you're talking like a couple of clicks within your Google Management Console. That's it, and then you're done.
Yeah.
It's not a case of sitting in front of every Chromebook installing a bit of software. That's not what it is. So it's dead easy.
Yeah, and for Windows as well, I guess. The IT teams are very used to rolling out software to Windows machines, and again, for them, it's a very, very straightforward process that they're very used to. So if we get on to some of the questions now in the last kind of 10-15 minutes. I know we've had quite a few questions through on the Q&A, so maybe if we get through those first. Do you want me to dive into those, Karen?
Yeah, well, we've got one here from Steve Watts, and he asks, how can I get an overview of what Smooth Wall Moderated Monitor is reporting across our mat?
Yeah, so it will depend on how your mat's set up, whether it's set up as a kind of an association of multiple schools, or if they're all just set up as individual schools. So we'll definitely pick this up afterwards with you, and maybe we just need to change how it's set up at our end. But effectively, when you log into, and like I'm sure this is what happens for Mark, when you log into the portal, you effectively see all of your schools on that page, and you can choose and tick which ones you want to look at the information for. So if you tick all of them and go in, it will show you, the overall report and all of the alerts for all of your schools. But we'll pick that up with you afterwards.
Okay, and one for you, Mark. Did you encounter any barriers from individual schools?
No, I didn't, to be honest. I mean, we're quite lucky in that we've got a really, really good executive team, a really, really good CEO, and he's got a very strong vision, and actually staff are all on board. And like I said earlier, it's safeguarding, so I don't think we had any pushback at all.
Great. This is an anonymous person. Does having the human element increase the cost?
Yes, I mean, we only provide this as a human moderated service. So we used to have two separate services. We used to have the human moderated one that we're talking about here, but we also had a separate product which the school moderated. And the feedback from schools was just that they just don't have time to do this kind of thing. And it actually increases the kind of the burden on them, because if there's something in there that is life-threatening and then they don't have time to check that, then that's you can imagine emotionally for that DSL, the fact that it was there and they didn't see it then puts that emotional burden on them to always be checking it. Whereas with the moderated service, the phone calls will alert them to those immediate threats to life, and the emails will come through for the lower level ones. Because everything's graded on that 1 to 5 scale, it allows them to be much more effective. And I'm not saying that they sit back and just wait for the phone to ring. They will still be engaging and looking at the emails and the portal, but it gives them that peace of mind that we will always make that phone call if it's something that's life-threatening.
Thanks, Rob. Tim has asked a question for Mark. Do you integrate Smoothwall Monitor into CPOMS if your academies use CPOMS?
Yeah, we do. It works really well. But again, we report it in a number of different ways. So it's integrated there, but we also have centralized reporting. And we were talking about there in terms of that central overview. We have that central overview. We also export the information as well manually. It comes out as a CSV or Excel document, and then we push that into our own report system. But yeah, we do integrate.
Yeah, I think it's a really important thing because CPOMS will contain things like classroom reports and lunchtime supervisors, what they've seen and reported, and things about other that has been reported to the DSL. But you really need that holistic view in your record keeping system of everything that's going on for that student. Again, that's something that Kixie is very, very clear about, that management and keeping of those records is crucial. So if you're really missing the digital side of things, which if we think back to the iceberg is such a huge part, then you're not really providing the best safeguarding to that student that you can. So yeah, integration with record keeping is absolutely vital.
We do integrate with CPOMS, My Concern, Safeguard as well. It's not just CPOMS on that. That was a good question. Thanks, Tim. And Nick's asked, how is it costed per student or per device?
Yeah, so we cost this per student. All of our solutions are per student, just because it's a lot easier for schools to manage. They don't have that worry then that if they do buy some more devices that they're going to have to then incur that additional license cost. So per student is great, and most people much prefer that way of working.
Mm-hmm. Nikki, if you drop us a line at enquiries@smoothwall.com, we can get a quote over to you. That's no problem at all. One final question, Rob. Does it work on roaming devices?
Yeah, so it doesn't matter where that device is. There's no server that needs to go into the school or anything the school need to put on their servers. So whether or not that student is at school, at home, a coffee shop, on holiday, if they're using a school managed device, regardless of where it is, it'll be monitored. We really make that distinction with school managed, because with the students' own devices, firstly, we've got no control over them. So even if we installed it on them, and I'm not sure really we wouldn't be taking a student's own device and installing software on it. But even if we did do that, there'd be nothing to stop them just uninstalling it. So really where we put that demarcation is around school-owned and managed devices. So, you know, your laptops, Chromebooks, iPads that students are using. So yeah, there's another question there. Does it cover searches on student devices at home using home Wi-Fi? Yeah, so not just searches, of course, but everything they're doing on that device, everything they're engaging with, they're typing in, will be monitored regardless of where they are. Okay.
Great.
So now we had a couple of questions on the screen that had come in before the webinar. I think we talked a little bit about, you know, the schools have already got filtering. Why do they need monitoring as well? I think Mark, you know, talked about that at length really, and how it's really a complementary solution to filtering rather than a replacement solution, you know. How much information can moderators see on a student? We're obviously very conscious about the privacy of students, and we want to make sure that the moderators have got enough to be able to do what they need to do, but not too much. You know, we always need to check ourselves on, are we putting in the appropriate checks and balances to maintain privacy for the students? So the moderators can look at, you know, what that student's been typing and what's on the screen. Well, they can't go back, you know, and have a look at what they were doing a week ago, 3 weeks ago. It's very kind of limited to, you know, last sort of 24 hours, that they can just see that. And they can only see, you know, very basic information like, you know, the username and what school they belong to. Another question's come in, so we might just dip to that one. The question, Mark, do your students know that it's on their devices?
Yeah, they're all aware. They're all made aware from the start.
Do you think that changes their behaviour in any ways, or do you think it's
there is a risk of that, but in my experience, if you didn't tell them, you try to keep that some sort of secret from them, they'd soon find out. They're fairly clever when it comes to stuff like that. So we did see, or we were slightly concerned that as soon as students realised that, they would avoid doing stuff online, but that isn't the case. We still, you know, they try and get around it the best they can, but they can't. But they are all aware that it's on there.
I think something that we see as well is that that point around students not feeling that they can come forward and tell somebody about it. Actually, if they know that if they type something in, somebody's going to see it, like
cry for help.
Yeah, I mean, it breaks down that fear, that barrier of them, you know, going up to a teacher and talking to them. Actually, you put it in there and then know that somebody's going to, you know, come and intervene and help them. So it works both ways, I think, them being aware of it.
Yeah. Question from Nick as well. Do schools need to tell parents if this extra level of monitoring is implemented? It's a good question, Nick. Do you tell parents, Mark?
It's in all of our policies, and it's in privacy statements and all, you know, everything that students sign and accept the user policy, that it's included in there. So do we tell parents? Did we tell parents directly? No, not necessarily. Did we tell the students and make sure it was in all our policies that are widely available to parents? Yes. But again, it's safeguarding, I think.
Yeah.
We've got that legal duty to do that. So I don't necessarily think you would communicate all of your safeguarding procedures or systems. You know, do we send an email to all parents telling them that we're using CPOMS to record stuff? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think, Nick, from Smoothwall's perspective, some of our schools do and have direct conversation with parents, and some don't. Some communicate it through their policies. But it's a safeguarding thing at the end of the day. But we wouldn't advise one way or the other. It's really up to you guys. But I would say we have 50-50 of those that do directly and those that do it through policy.
And we just had one, how long did it take to deploy map-wide? I guess there's two elements here. There's the technical deployment in terms of the software, but then there's the operational side, the training for DSLs, getting them access onboarded into the system. How long did that take you, Mark?
We were quite lucky in that we had developed this single domain across all of the trusts. So it's a single login. It's effectively one single big network that joins all of our academies together. So the deployment of the software itself was a matter of hours in terms of after we made that decision and got the installs back off Smoothwall. Yes, the training, the procedures take a little bit longer. I think we did a lot of work prior to the summer holidays in terms of training DSLs. And I mean, you know, we're talking about a week or so, launched it in September in earnest, and everyone was off. I mean, it's fairly intuitive. There isn't a great deal of training that needed, to be fair. So if you were going to implement it, you could do it within the space of weeks if you really wanted to make sure staff are trained. If you wanted to get the system out there now, you're talking, you know, literally hours if you've got the right infrastructure. If not, maybe a few days if you need to do that across different single academies. But most of the work set up for you as well. I mean, you're literally providing Smoothwall with the contact details for who they are in the schools, and then you get the MSI back and you deploy that, and that's it. So it's done. So it can be very, very quick.
Yeah, and we provide that training as well. So it's not like you need to develop your own training materials. We've got trainers who will, you know, jump on a Zoom with all of your DSLs and walk them through what they need to do. So yeah, it's something that, you know, obviously if you wanted to do it, could be turned around very, very quickly.
Fine, we're on the hour, so we probably need to wrap it up. Mark, thank you so much for your time and for sharing that perspective. That's so invaluable. And please remember, everyone, Mark's kind offer to have a chat with you if you want to talk Matt to Matt about monitoring. He'll help all he can, which is, we're very grateful for him for doing that. But it's a unique perspective to talk to another school and another Matt in terms of how they're doing it. So we really appreciate that. We're going to be at BET this year, hurrah! At the end of this month. If you come into BET, please come say hi. We'd love to see you. If you can't make it to BET, don't worry. We are going to do everything we're doing at BET offline as well. Sorry, not offline, but over email and over Zooms and things, so nobody misses out. So if you've not received our first comms about BET, drop us an email, inquiries@smoothwall.com. We'll make sure you're on that list, and we'll send you the webinars that we've got coming up and the surveys and all the things we'll be doing at BET. We're going to be making sure that everyone can take advantage if you can't make it. But if you are, please come say hi. It'll be great to see everybody. We can't wait to just get into that physical space, masks and sanitizer and everything. We've got a new a live roundtable webinar happening called Remote and Cloud Filtering, and that's with Tom and Rob, Tom Newton and Rob here. So they'll be answering all questions regarding remote and cloud filtering, particularly in light of the Cisco umbrella lifting later this year, which is what's triggered that. So drop us a line and we can make sure you're on the mailing list for that webinar as well. But Rob and Mark, thank you so much for your time today. It's enlightening as always, and I think it's a subject that's so close to our hearts, obviously, but it's so vital today. And you know, as you mentioned, Mark, we call it life-changing, life-enhancing and life-saving, and that's not an exaggeration to say it saves lives, because it does, and schools tell us about it week in, week out. So thank you, everybody. Any questions, inquiries@smoothwall.com. We're on the other end of that email. I am my colleague Adele. We'll answer any questions that you've got. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking time out today.